Okay, hello everyone. This is CounterYolo again, bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And in this video, we're just going to talk a little bit about PvP. We're not going to get into everything that I thought I was initially wanting to get into today, but yeah, this video ballooned a lot more in depth than I thought it was going to be as well. So this is basically what we're going over today. This is just going to be one slide. I thought this is what this video is going to be about entirely, but it evolved and transformed into mainly this. So a lot of this video is going to talk about the various consoles and devices and bridge abilities that cover some general things of what I consider when I generally think about PvP and help people with PvP. I'll start off with the difference between PvE and PvP in terms of this game. A consumable that really warps how the PvP meta works entirely in this game, and then we'll get into those aspects of how PvP builds work. And then we'll conclude with some stuff right here. I will eventually, in the description, give you some links to some SEO Academy builds that I will make, talking about some things that should theoretically work for PvP. I did not have enough time this past week to make those myself. I mean, most of this stuff for this video, I was making notes about consoles as I was waiting in airports throughout the country. I did not have time really much at all on my computer to really go in depth about this. So hopefully I'll still find some benefits out of this video, and let's go ahead and get started. So when it comes to PvP, it's very different from PvE. In general, TFOs and missions in this game, because you're only finding NPCs that are really stupid and dumb and don't adapt to what you're actually doing, you can basically just maximize entirely on as much damage per second as you could possibly squeeze out of your ship. Maybe tune back your ship a tiny bit if you need a little bit of survival to survive some spike damage. But other than that, just doing that, focusing on area of effect types of damage, focusing on damage and crit chance, crit severity types of modifiers, that's generally going to work really well for you in Star Trek Online in general. And then we get to the competitive PvE queues, which is what PvEVP actually is. You have two different teams that are fighting in the same type of environment. Generally, it's like two different routes that are parallel to one another, and you have the option to go to the other route and start messing with the other team that's trying to do the same types of objectives that you're doing. It's a little bit more fun in ground combat than space. In space, it's like you only get to interfere in like the last phase. So it's only if you're really close you get to interfere. Anyway, you can start to see, in my opinion, that's how you really should be able to introduce players to PvP, is by having that type of fun environment where it's like, well, it's still the objective of whoever finishes the PvE queue first wins, versus true PvP in this game, which is basically just you have two teams of 5 and the goal is whichever team gets to 15 kills first wins. So, and in that type of situation, the focus is maximizing survival and adding a tiny bit of damage as you can feel comfortable adding more damage to your ship. Because if you're someone who's constantly dying a whole bunch in PvP, you're going to be an extreme detriment to the success of your team, versus, you know, PvE, where it's like if you die 4 or 5 times in a queue, if you have a really high DPS ship, you might still be able to crank out a couple 100,000 damage per second, even though you were dead for like 40 seconds of the queue for some of those longer ones. In PvP, it doesn't really work that way. You have to have builds that allow you to survive. There's different ways to survive, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Additionally, for actually making the builds themselves, many of your budget PvP builds that you might be able to find on the internet are quite often much more expensive than many of the higher end PvE DPS builds that exist on the internet as well. It's very costly to get into the PvP scene, and to even get one that's a type of build that's not detrimental to your team. Basically, if you're doing PvP, my benchmark when I talk to players about it, it's like, can you spend 30,000 Zen on making a single build for a single character? If that's out of the realm of possibility for you, I would say don't really bother too much with PvP. I mean, sure, there might be some like casual PvP stuff that your fleet might be able to do. The Fourth Continuum, which is what Alpha Squadron Elite decided to rename themselves as, the main armada that I'm a part of right now. They have a casual PvP scene like every Friday or every other Friday, in which they welcome people even that don't have full Mark 15 Epic everything builds, and they basically just have fun. If someone doesn't have a good build, they might blow up once, and then the enemy team will just stop focusing them and focus on the other guys that are doing a whole lot better and have a lot stronger builds. In PvP overall, though, teamwork is essential. You're doing single target damage. You're doing a lot of accuracy and hull and shield penetration for your builds, and the reason for that is because there are a couple of specific PvP-specific consumables from the competitive reputation that are really strong. Now, in PvEVP, the competitive reputation's TFOs, the takedown buffs are pretty potent, frankly, especially the critical chance one. However, when it comes to true space PvP, it's the increased max shields that are really the game changers, because these shields, or these consumables, last for 15 minutes. They still last for that 15 minutes, even if you die during that 15-minute period. They still keep on going. And for both of these types, you completely stop shield bleed through for that 15 minutes, which is insanely good. Normally with shields, like 90 to 95% of the damage goes to the shields, and 5 to 10% of the damage goes through the shields and hits the hull of your starship. So even if you had something like Vertical Polarity up on your starship that's absorbing a lot of damage, you would still have a little bit of damage going through the shields and still hitting your hull and still hurting you quite a bit. And what this consumable means is, unless the enemy that you're fighting has inherent shield penetration in their build or traits and such, as long as your shields stay up, you're going to survive. And that's basically what it comes down to, which means a lot of the meta in PvP isn't just based upon trying to get lots of accuracy on your starship, because everyone has tons of accuracy and defense to avoid hits and to try to hit you. But additionally, it's trying to get a lot of extra shield penetration on your starship so that you can counter this problem, and so that you can actually hurt someone's hull even when their shields are up. Because unless you have a drain person on your team, or you have someone with a vapor build that can actually eviscerate someone's shields after their Vertical Polarity cooldown is done, there's a good chance that you're going to have to take down people with their shields still up. So it's something you're going to need to basically be aware of. I don't know why people don't talk about these symbols too much, but it's something that's very critical in a lot of PvP stuff that goes on inside of this game. Now, for the general aspects of PvP itself, I have 3 general categories that I consider stuff in when I look at bridge officer abilities, traits, and consoles that I put on a starship. Of course, there's damage. Obviously, there's various ways to do that. But additionally, there's 2 general ways to survive besides just killing the other person before they're able to defeat you, and that's either having tons and tons of durability on your starship, so that you're able to withstand a lot of the stuff that's going on. Or the other option is you can do a lot of hit and run strategies of doing a lot of hits really quickly and then moving out of the 10-kilometer range beyond the enemy that you're attacking, so that they aren't able to retaliate very well. And that's what I consider mobility here. I recommend having at least 2 things in both mobility and durability for sure. For any non-squishy build inside of PvP, you're probably going to want to have a lot more than that, especially with traits and things additionally added to your ship, but that's my general rule of thumb that I generally do bare minimum. Of course, my tank builds have a lot of things like this as well, as you've all probably seen in several of my builds on this channel. So let's go ahead and just start with this right away. I was pretty lazy with the pictures, so you're going to see this picture a lot in this video, just the way it is. When it comes to mobility, this is the things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about some immunities that you can use. some teleports, some speed boosts, some holds and disables, as well as some pulls. And when I talk about immunities, that's a text that Cryptic likes to use for their abilities. If you ever actually email me or talk to me in game, I will refer to these as escapes, though, because that's effectively what these are. You're stuck in a bind. You need a way to get out of dodge and to survive. You need to leave. These are the types of things that you can use to get away from enemies, and because these don't just quite often give you extra speed boosts, but they give you immunity to a lot of those control types of effects. So even if you have 0 control resistance, you pop one of these things and you can still escape a super strong gravity well, a super strong tractor beam, and those different types of things. Escaping holds. A lot of these things can actually get you out of those situations. Basically, every PvP build that I've ever seen will always have attack pattern Omega in their bridge officer seating. Typically, it's just in the Lieutenant Commander slot, because the difference between Lieutenant Commander and Commander for attack pattern Omega 1 to 2 and 3 isn't really that substantial, because the big point is that you're using this ability as an extra escape. It's why you'll quite often see on the DPS-oriented PvP builds that you'll see attack pattern Beta or attack pattern Lambda alongside attack pattern Omega inside of their build, and you're like, well, how in the world could you possibly alternate between those? Because the cooldowns don't match much at all between attack pattern Omega and those other bridge officer abilities. It's because attack pattern Omega is used differently than the other attack patterns inside of the game. It's used as an escape type tool for you when you are in a bind in PvP. When it comes to consoles themselves, these bottom 3 ones are very limited in their usage for starships because they're bound to certain starships. These top 2 ones are not only better in many ways, but they're usable on all starships now. When it comes to bridge officer abilities, though, alongside attack pattern Omega, Pilot Team is a very strong, noteworthy one as well, because it's another escape tool, but it's also one that you could apply to an ally instead of yourself. So let's say you're building a support type build. If you have a pilot seat, you probably want to put Pilot Team in there, just so that when you see an ally that's in trouble, you can pop Pilot Team on them, and they can get away from the enemies as well. Ox to Dampeners is a very standard engineering ability in the Ox category. Ox to Bat can be used as well for cooldowns. Ox to Structural Integrity Field can also be used if you have the duty officer that makes your self heals placate enemies. Ox to Sif is such a spammable ability that's pretty commonly applied with that duty officer. Polaris Hole is used more in PvE than PvP, but it still is usable too. And here's just the stats for the Enhanced Divinity Coordination Protocol and the Auxiliary Ejection Assembly. Keep in mind, this console, it's the Tier 5 and Tier 6 variant, needs the Starship to get it. The Tier 5 version is available from the Gemidar Vanguard expansion pack from the C-Store. I can't remember which Tier 5 Gemidar ship that this console comes from that doesn't have the passives on it. But if you get that expansion pack, you can get the regular Divinity Coordination Protocol from one of the starships and get the clicky off of this thing, which only gives you immunity to most of your movement debuffs, but it also gives you immunity to confuses and placates as well for its duration, which is pretty powerful. Plus a little bit of extra damage and a little bit extra accuracy and defense too, which is always welcome. The Auxiliary Ejection Assembly is much more of a exotic-oriented clicky console, which can go a little bit longer if you have this thing stack and have the warp cores hit people. Which kind of makes sense, as that's kind of like what happened with the Kelvin Enterprise in the Kelvin, that first Kelvin movie. Now, when it comes to teleports, there are three console teleports. There is a 4th one, but it's pretty lousy. It's stuck on the board SKUs. And your engines are disabled for a few seconds after you teleport, which I think kind of defeats the purpose of teleports, but that's just me. There are two flanking types of teleports in the game. There's the subspace jumper, which is usable on all starships, and there's the ambush gateway generator, which is a much better version of the subspace jumper, but it's only usable on the Herald starships. So unless you're using the Herald Raider, and you want to have a teleport that immediately gets you onto someone's rear arc to start doing flanking damage, you're probably going to have to use the subspace jumper instead. Warp Burst Capacitor is a survival teleport. Many of you know it as the Picard maneuver. I've talked about this concept before. The duplicate doesn't matter too much. The big thing is your teleport is 6 kilometers forward, and you're untargetable for 5 seconds with a little bit of bonus damage as well. This is very, very nice in PvP to get you out of dodge really quick. In terms of bridge off abilities that do a teleport in some fashion, the Subspace Vortex has an optional teleport with its AoE damage. Most people won't use that teleport, but it's there if you want to use it. The Heisenberg Empire has a random 1 kilometer teleport with an AoE Confuse. The big thing though that's really powerful is called Subspace Interception, and this is something that I don't think I've seen people really talk about too much, but this is ridiculously powerful in PvP. So what goes on with this command ability is if you see an ally that's below 50% health, 50% whole HP anyway, you can teleport to them, and after the teleport, you give them a short-term time period in which they are completely untargetable, and they are immune to all movement debuffs as well. It's very powerful, and it allows them, because if they're that low, they're probably in trouble anyway. It allows them to get a respite and to get away from the enemies that are attacking them. Form Up is another teleport as well. The damage you get while you're close to them, it's really hard to execute that properly. You basically can use this as just an extra teleport to get to an ally, is how I would really think about this. And this doesn't have a health requirement, so you don't need to worry about it as much as Subspace Interception is. When it comes to speed and turn boosts, these are some of the things you'll see a lot more often in a lot of PvP builds out there, especially the Impulse Capacitance Cell. You'll see in a lot of the more considered budget DPS builds out there, especially for PvP. It's a speed boost console effectively. This does put evasive maneuvers on cooldown, so that is something to be aware of. It does put evasive maneuvers on cooldown. Cool. All right. The big one though, that's the winner from more recent times, is the personal wormhole generator. It does a speed boost, plus you're untargetable for a while. While you're untargetable, you get to heal for a little bit during that duration, and then when you come out of the wormhole and become targetable again, you get a bonus to all damage, which is pretty nice. The enhanced subspace wake generator from the tier 6 Rising Corvette is also pretty nice as well. It's basically the impulse capacitance cell in terms of a speed boost, but you also debuff and slow the enemies behind you. The clean getaway pilot ability, in my opinion, is basically just the subspace wake generator's ability, but just put into a bridge officer ability instead. Something to be careful though, that the tier 6 Rising Corvette's console is usable on all starships. The last that I checked a few weeks ago, the tier 5 version of this console from the tier 5 Rising Corvette is still only usable on the Rycian starships in this game. So don't be fooled and try to get the tier 5 Rycian starship, otherwise you're going to, just for this console, because you're probably going to be sorry. Alright, and there's just a couple of other consoles here if you have the right starship for them. Now, in terms of other things for mobility, here's some stuff with holds and disables. In many situations, these two things basically mean the exact same thing. People are not going to be, your enemy is not going to be moving and not going to be attacking you during this duration because they're stuck. The difference between these two things more just comes down to the fact that there are a lot of stuff in this game that allows you to remove disabled conditions. There are less things in this game to allow you to get rid of or to get out of holds inside of this game. As thus, if you see something that does a hold to an ally or does a hold against you, that is going to be quite a bit more annoying to play around and to find counters against, frankly. The Alpha Deception Field is the classic, really old console that does this. It's an AoE hold after the thing goes off, but also whenever this thing goes off, it actually resets all of your bridge officer cooldowns as well. It is why this is one of the consoles that is very commonly banned in PvP. Having a console that just resets all of your bridge officer abilities and still has a relatively low cooldown considering that, to many players seems unfair. And it's still something that has a reasonable cost, frankly, on the exchange, considering how old it is and how effective it often quite is inside the game. Many of these guys over here are just disables, not super interesting, frankly. And here's just the rough stats for those consoles if you want to see those yourself. The Templar Cylinder and the Deception Field are usable on all starships. The Tholian Web Cannon, which I consider the most annoying hold in the entire game, because it is a hold against you in which the person's allies can still use all their weapons against you. Technically, in some situations, the two-piece set with this guy that makes all of the enemies around this person also stuck and held for a while can be annoying as well. But most often what I've seen in PvP is people time this wrong, so they don't have lots of AoE damage attacking the enemy while they're held in place and stuck. So it really is just a 7-second respite is what quite often happens whenever people don't use this console correctly against enemies. So yeah, when it comes to holds and disables, intelligence and science are kind of the way that you do it. Pretty straightforward there when it comes to the bridge officer abilities themselves. In terms of some extra pulls, these are not everything. There's definitely lots of other consoles out there that do them. These are just the initial ones that came to mind for me, especially because I talked with someone a little while ago that explained and showed a post showing of how good multi-tower tractor arrays are for both control as well as for damage, which is pretty cool. Which means a lot of people probably should be putting this on your starships anyway now. Jet Red Matter is pretty powerful, but it's from a promo ship, so is that really worth it to buy the promo ship for that? Maybe if you're flying it in PvP. Otherwise, I'm not sure if that's really worth it for you. There's a lot of your standard control abilities over here as well. Keep in mind, tractor beam repulsors can be a pull if you get a specific duty officer. Just look for it in the STL Wiki. Just type in STL Wiki tractor beam repulsors and just look through the list of duty officers that can affect it, and you should be able to find it. So for this next part is going to be durability. There are a lot of things in here for durability. Obviously, I'm also a tank captain, so there's going to be a lot of stuff in here. This will not be everything, but this is the list, and let's get started. So, big things to point out first off, there are a lot of ways to cleanse different types of debuffs inside the game. A lot of them come through whole heals, so you'll see a lot of these abilities show up again later on in this section. The one that I was struggling with quite a bit was, I could have sworn that there was another console like the Deep Analytics Sensor package from the Sona Command Science Vessel, but I tried. I looked through all 300 plus consoles again to try to find one, and I could not find one. Maybe I'm just stumped, maybe because I'm just a little tired when I was making this video. I just couldn't find another console like this, and the big thing is, not only whenever you use this click, not only does it give you armor and shield pen, the bigger thing is that this console removes the longest duration buff from an enemy, which to me is gigantically huge. I thought there was a bridge officer ability that did something like that. I thought there's other consoles that did something like that. I am stumped trying to find it. Please let us all know in the comments what other things in the game are like this console. If not, Cryptic, if you're watching this, please add more consoles that are like this. It'll add much more counterplay to PvP inside of this game. Please and thank you. Cool? Cool. Now, when it comes to these bridge officer abilities over here themselves, the best one in my opinion is Rally Point Marker, because it removes all debuffs. not just some specific ones. Rally Play Marker removes all debuffs. Another reason why Command's really good. Another reason why the Sona Command Science Vessel is such a good support vessel inside of the game for PvP. Alright. For invulnerable and untargetable types of things for durability, most people that do PvP consider these types of consoles cheating. So in a lot of organized PvP events, you'll quite often see most of these types of consoles and abilities quite often banned in PvP because people don't want to deal with this. They don't want to deal with someone who can on a click be invulnerable and untargetable for like 20 seconds, or deal with someone who just escapes and heals and comes right back. Someone who resets all their cooldowns. Those types of things as well. And I don't fully blame them. There's not a ton of counterplay to this. It's almost like you have to just be like, all right, see you in like 10-15 seconds. I guess I can't do anything to you right now. Okie dokie. Yeah, these are all powerful because of those types of things. I mean, the untargetability aspect, you could have said like in older times that, you know, people with stealth and cloaking, and then people with high perception to try to see through the cloaking was kind of like the kind of counterplay. This is the, I don't care what counterplay you have, you can't target me when I use these things. And there are definitely cues like that where enemies do cloaks and have something like this type of untargetability applied to their starship as well, so that even if you have really good perception or have ways to disable cloaks, it doesn't matter. They are untargetable. It doesn't matter. I've also mentioned reverse shield polarity in here. It's not really invulnerability, but to most players, when they use reverse shield polarity, it feels like they're basically invulnerable for the duration. So I have it here just as kind of like an honorable mention for this category. For confuses and placates, these are very powerful inside the game too. In many organized PvP events, a lot of these types of things are also banned, because this is another thing that there is counterplay in, especially in the immunity section that I've talked about before, but it's counterplay that people don't want to deal with. They're like, why counterplay this when I can just ban this stuff from my PvP so I don't have to worry about it? A lot of people feel like that, so I don't fully blame them. I don't blame them at all. But these are some of the abilities that can do those types of things. As you notice, one of the things in here is the Mirador Sensor Baffler from a certain starship that used to be only from loot boxes that was recently added to a 12,000 Zen Picard bundle recently. It is a very strong placate. Now, for those of you that don't know the difference, placates and confuses function in a similar way to how untargetable works. The difference is that if someone is truly untargetable, it is a buff to that actual starship. With confuses and placates, that's actually a debuff condition against one or more starships around a particular starship. In all those situations, it means that you can't target that particular starship. The difference for these two in particular is placate is just, yeah, that person is untargetable and it's just gone from your sensors. Confuse not only does that, but it messes with your sensors so that now it looks like your allies are your enemies and your enemies are your allies. While you're confused, by the way, if you have AoE healing consoles going off, those AoE healing consoles will actually heal your enemies too. So it's, whenever you are confused, it is very dangerous in terms of what you do. So just keep that in mind. Because of that, I generally consider confuses much more powerful, much more annoying than general placates inside of this game. So, just saying. And there's a bunch of abilities and consoles that initially came to mind to me that do these types of things. Now, for healing, there are a lot of things that do healing. Granted, for all that, so I've just color coded the stuff over here. If it's red, it's from a tactical station. Blue is a science station. The yellowish color is for engineering, and white is for a specialist station. And there's a lot more hull heal stuff than shield heal, kind of the way it is inside the game. And obviously for hull heals, the DPRM and Air Structural Capacitor, Permanent Field Projector are all ridiculously good healing consoles. DPRM also happens to give you bonus resistance, and it also gives you damage, which makes it one of the most powerful, universally good consoles for every build inside the game. So there are other ones in here as well. Cross Particle Decider gives you a bonus to heals in general, plus a sizable amount of bonus damage resistance rating, but it's stuck to one starship, unfortunately. Hull Image Refractors is a sizable heal as well, with a decent cloak that can be disabled in PvP. There are abilities to disable cloaks without having to target you, which is important to know, by the way. But yeah, a lot of these things are all pretty widely used for a lot of players. Tactical Team is almost a must-have for any build inside the game, period. The rest of the stuff, it's kind of up to your discretion as to how much you feel you need to budget into these types of things. Now, in terms of resistances, there are quite a bit less of these inside the game, and many of these that are resistances also happen to be in the same list as a lot of ones that also heal. Just kind of the way it is. So yeah, in terms of the consoles themselves, the big ones here, by the way, the Dominion Defense screen is ridiculously good, and as of last summer, it was one of those consoles, like with all the Geminar and Geminar Vanguard consoles, that were extended in terms of their limitability so that they're actually usable on every starship inside the game now, instead of just the Geminar and Geminar Vanguard starships. So it's definitely a nice quality of life improvement. Hopefully Cryptic maybe looks at my list of consoles and they're like, huh, that is a cool console. Maybe we'll just let everyone use it on all their starships now, so that the demand goes up a little bit. It's another reason why I wish, like the Resonant Dissipation Matrix from the Breen starships, I wish that was usable on my other starships, because that console is really, really good in giving team-wide bridge offshore cooldowns. Anyway, some of these things are good. Some things that Reroute shows the whole containment is pretty garbage, but I mean, the stuff is there in case you actually want it. Now, when it comes to damage, this is not going to be a comprehensive list by any means. Pretty much beyond this list itself, just look at PvE DPS builds, frankly. Look at their builds, see what they're putting on their starship. And again, as I've said earlier in this video, when it comes to PvP, your focus number one should be survival. After you've found a build that is durable enough that you feel comfortable starting to pull back on the durability to add additional damage or disables, placates, those types of things to your starship, that's when you start looking more at these types of things. Domino is the best DPS console in the game right now. Also has accuracy on it, as well as hostile acquisition and weapon system enhancer. Both have sizable accuracy on their consoles as well. Hostile acquisition is relatively cheap on the exchange. It is a bit more expensive because it's been a while since that console was added to the game. This console is from the low buy store, so be very careful that you want a slot for that console before you waste 200 low buy before you're like, oh well, I actually wanted this console, this console, and this console, and I'm out of slots for the weapon system enhancer. And these are some of the abilities that I seem to see a lot for PvP as well. Cannon Rapid Fire and Beam Overload are the single target ones. There's been some discussion about torpedo high yield versus torpedo spread. Obviously, certain torpedoes are better at spread than high yield, and vice versa. So, if you're a true torpedo captain, you need to learn your torpedoes as to which ones are better with what. Feedback pulse is a really strong counter against people who are just energy based for their energy attacks, especially if you have the invincible starship trait and people are still firing at you regardless. You can still use feedback pulse to send a lot of damage back at those starships and allow them to kill themselves. or a lot of this has to be defeated, I guess is the better term for it. But anyway, direct energy modulation gives you additional weapon shield penetration, which, as I said before, if the people in PvP and space are smart and use the right consumable from the competitive reputation, they're going to have perfect shields, and so you need even more shield penetration than normal to get through them. Recursive Shearing is a ridiculously powerful damage ability in PvP. After you activate this, a lot of the damage against an enemy is stored for a while, even if they heal a lot of it out. And then over a 6-second period, boom, it or is it after 6 seconds? It's a big boom, something like that. After a few seconds, a sizable portion of that damage that player takes, they take again as damage that completely bypasses all shield and hull resistances. So if it's someone that relies upon their resistances to survive instead of raw stats, they're probably going to be defeated just from that ability, and your entire team focusing on that one player. Narrow Sensor Bands is a ridiculously strong ability as well. Not only do you get immunity to confuse and implicates during this, but you get extra damage as well whenever you're near enemies, meaning whenever you're within 6 kilometers or closer, you get an additional extra damage because of that ability whenever it's on. Now, as for type of builds themselves, as I said before, I was not able to really make the time to actually make STO Academy links and stuff going into the builds themselves. Depending upon how much stuff we get this week, I may or may not be able to make an STO Academy link for many of these types of builds here. But as for the general builds themselves, dogfighting is the general type of build that I would recommend you all to start out with for sure. It's one that has a lot of survival and a little bit of damage. It's basically the standard balanced build. Of course, you have some variants on it, like the speed and vapor builds. The speed build is just you have a lot more speed and speed boost in your build instead of raw durability, resistance, and heal stuff in your ship to allow you to survive a little bit easier with speed. Keep in mind, even if your defense is ridiculously high and an enemy's accuracy is really low, at most you can dodge 75% of all attacks from enemies. Even if someone hasn't checked into enemy's accuracy at all, they are still going to hit you 25% of the time. So just because you're going fast doesn't mean you're going to be able to survive a PvP battle. You have to be able to withstand at least a little bit of that damage that's coming in as well. Vapor builds are basically your battle cloaking one-shot builds. They're either extremely awesome or they are completely worthless and debilitate your entire team. I don't recommend most people to make a vapor build because you have to really know how the DPS meta works. And you're basically transferring a PvE DPS build into PvP. You make it single target, and you generally put it on a fast ship with a battle cloak. And you use the battle cloaking bonus effectively for damage to try to take someone out in one shot. Builds that I'm probably never going to be able to do for y'all is Torpedo and Energy Exotic. I know how Energy Exotic works in PvE, but not PvP. Energy Exotic is quite a bit better in PvP, though, from people that I've talked to. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to torpedo builds, I don't know how to properly do torpedo builds. I know that from what I've been reading, it requires torpedo high yield and torpedo spread and different other things on their starship. I'm not a fan personally. The most what I do with torpedoes is add a torpedo if it enhances an energy-based build, or if I'm doing a science build. Well, torpedoes just make it simpler. So that's why I use torpedoes with those builds. As for support-oriented builds, these are my terminology. The terminology for other players is a little bit different than what I'm going to say in this video. There are two types of science type builds for support. There's the interference type of build, in which you're stacking your ship with tons of confuses, blockades, disables, and holds to impair the enemy so they can't do anything. And then you also have the debuffer variant, which some people just call the drain type of build, in which You're adding tons of debuffs, tons of drains, and those types of things to make it so that when your allies are doing fast passes in like their speed builds or constantly fighting in their dogfighting types of builds, it's a lot easier to defeat that type of enemy. And then of course there's the healer, which is basically what I used to do. You can also play this as a slightly off tank. The goal of this starship is to provide very strong healing to your team to help keep whatever targeted teammate on your team that's being hit really hard with all 5 enemies to be able to survive a little bit easier. If you want to be an off tank, I suggest using a starship that people consider a noob type of starship, so that they're like, oh well, this person obviously doesn't play PvP. There's no reason why you bring a Galaxy X to a PvP battle. And then they fight it, and then you realize, oh, we can't kill this thing. Let's focus someone else, and then at that point you can basically just use all of your heals on your allies instead. Or you can just do a normal support build and just not do that. That's all. That also works as well. There are some great secondary deflectors which can help with enhancing healing as well, so keep that in mind. As for some strong traits, here's a couple of really good ones. Invincible as a starship trait is one that, if you're serious about PvP, you really should be putting this on your starship. Even though when I used to play I didn't necessarily always use Invincible, I decided to eventually, because Star Trek Online has a notability for having a lot of really big lag spikes, frankly. And especially if you're doing PvP, a lag spike of 3 seconds could mean that you are dead if you don't have the Invincible trait. So for that reason alone, Invincible is worth it. There's lots of other reasons why, but the lag issue is my personal reason why you probably should be getting Invincible for PvP. Additionally, a trait that's constantly banned in basically most organized PvP groups is called pseudo submission. Whenever you heal yourself, you do an AoE placate to enemies around you, which, considering the Ox Destruction Integrity Field list has a 10-second cooldown, or last 10 seconds for its resistance, 15-second cooldown, something like that. But that one can be spammed a ton. Combine that with pseudo submission, and you're constantly doing AoE placates. Now, yes, if you placate and disable an enemy enough, they do get some, what's it called exactly? Something about basically that they're temporarily immune to placates and confuses, so that they have a little bit of protection. Essentially, in Star Trek Online, the developers don't want you to be able to placate and confuse people to the point that they can never actually attack you with their energy weapons. That just wouldn't be fun at all, frankly. And so they have that provision in there to make sure that doesn't happen. Honor Dead's really good because it sacks from incoming damage, and you're going to take a lot of damage in PvP. So this thing will stack up really quickly. It's obviously other traits. Go for the kill for cannon DPS, super weapon ingenuity for beam overload. A couple of survival traits here, DPS traits, and other types of traits that exist as well. When I eventually have time to make some SGO Academy builds for you all, I'll have a note section in there where I talk about some of the traits that I decided to choose for the build itself. But anyway, that's basically it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I believe, well, Zip Films is definitely going to have a ship video showing off the new Khitomer Alliance Battlecruiser. That's officially going to be announced very soon. And assuming that they give us the official stats, I've already made a prep PowerPoint video just in case they don't change the stats on it. That's basically ready to go right now. We'll see what happens on Monday to see for sure. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.